What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy faces off against morning television's biggest anchors in a battle that nobody saw coming? In just 29 seconds, everything fell apart on live TV. And what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that shake the entertainment industry to its core. Don't miss out on tomorrow's bombshell. Last night's episode of Good Morning America was supposed to be a celebration. Clint Eastwood, the man who defined what it means to be a Hollywood icon, was there to talk about his latest project and his incredible career spanning over 6 decades. The studio audience was packed with fans eager to see the living legend in person. The energy in the room was electric as the cameras started rolling and the hosts greeted their guest with bright smiles and warm welcomes. But within minutes, something shifted in the air. You could feel it even through the television screen. This wasn't going to be the friendly chat everyone expected. The interview started innocently enough. The lead host, trying to connect with the audience, brought up Eastwood's most famous characters, the roles that made him a household name. They showed clips from his classic westerns, the squinting eyes and poncho from the spaghetti westerns, moments from Dirty Harry with that iconic line everyone knows, and scenes from his award-winning directorial work that proved he was more than just an action star. The audience applauded enthusiastically, clearly thrilled to be in the presence of such greatness. Some people in the crowd even stood up, giving him a standing ovation before the real interview had even begun. Eastwood nodded politely, the way he always did. Not one for big displays of emotion or gratitude. He was there to do a job, to talk about his work, and then leave. That's how it had always been throughout his career. No drama, no nonsense, just honest conversation about honest work. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. The hosts asked about his creative process, about what inspired him to direct as well as act, about the challenges of working in Hollywood for so many decades. Eastwood answered thoughtfully, giving the kind of insight that only someone with his experience could provide. He talked about learning from the masters he'd worked with early in his career, about how filmmaking had changed over the years, about the importance of trusting your instincts as an artist. The audience was eating it up. These were the stories they'd come to hear. This was the legend they wanted to meet. But then, you could see it in the host's eyes. That moment when they decided to shift gears. That calculated look that said the friendly portion of the program was over, and now it was time to get to the real agenda. It's a look you see a lot on television these days. That moment when journalists stop being interested in understanding their guests and start being interested in challenging them, in creating conflict, in generating the kind of controversy that gets people talking on social media. Then came the pivot that changed everything. The host leaned forward with that practiced television smile and said, "Clint, your films have always been about tough men standing up for what they believe in. But some critics say your movies promote a kind of outdated masculinity that doesn't fit with today's world. How do you respond to people who say your work is, well, problematic?" The studio went quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Eastwood's expression didn't change much, but anyone who knows his films could recognize that look. It was the same steely gaze he gave bad guys right before all hell broke loose. "Problematic," Eastwood repeated slowly, his voice low and measured. "That's an interesting word you're throwing around on national television." The host tried to maintain control. That professional smile still plastered on, but you could see it was starting to look strained around the edges. "Well, it's a conversation happening in Hollywood right now. There's a movement toward more sensitive storytelling, more inclusive narratives. Some people feel your films represent a bygone era that maybe we should move beyond." Eastwood sat back in his chair, and for a moment it seemed like he might just let it slide, the way he'd let so many things slide over the years. But you could see something working behind his eyes, some calculation being made about whether this was worth the fight. And then he made his decision, and his words cut through the studio like a knife. "Let me tell you something about sensitivity," Eastwood said, his tone sharp enough to make several audience members sit up straighter in their seats. "I've been making films for longer than you've been alive. I've told stories about real people facing real challenges, not fairy tales designed to make everyone feel comfortable about their choices. The world isn't comfortable. It's hard. It's unfair. And sometimes the only way through it is to be tougher than the circumstances trying to break you down. The co-host jumped in quickly, clearly seeing the tension rising and trying to smooth things over before they got out of hand. Of course, Clint. No one's questioning your legacy or your contributions to cinema. You're a legend. Everyone knows that. We're just asking if you think there's room for evolution in storytelling, for different perspectives to be heard. Evolution, Eastwood said, shaking his head slowly, deliberately, like a disappointed teacher watching a student miss the point entirely. You people love your buzzwords, don't you? Evolution, problematic, inclusive, representation. How about this for evolution? How about we stop pretending that telling difficult truths is somehow wrong? How about we stop apologizing for showing the world as it actually is instead of how some committee of people who've never faced real hardship thinks it should be portrayed? The tension in the studio was becoming unbearable. You could feel it pressing down on everyone in the room like a physical weight. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they should be watching this or looking away. Some pulled out their phones, already recording what they sensed was going to be a moment that people would talk about for days. The hosts exchanged nervous glances, quick looks that said they knew this was spinning out of their control but weren't sure how to stop it. This was live television, after all. There was no pause button, no chance to reset and try again. The lead host, perhaps sensing they needed to regain the upper hand or risk losing the interview entirely, pressed harder. His voice took on a more aggressive edge, the friendly morning show personality giving way to something more combative. But Clint, don't you think artists have a responsibility to consider the impact of their work? Especially now, when young people are looking for role models who represent different values than the ones you grew up with? When they're looking for heroes who solve problems in ways that don't involve violence or aggression? That's when Eastwood's composure really started to crack. His jaw tightened visibly, the muscles working beneath his weathered skin. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of his chair, now gripped them tightly. When he spoke, there was genuine anger behind his words. The kind of anger that comes from years of holding your tongue and finally deciding you're done being quiet. Responsibility? You want to lecture me about responsibility? You want to sit there, in your perfect studio, with your perfect lighting and your perfect script, and tell me I haven't been responsible enough? His voice rose slightly, not quite shouting, but definitely not the calm, measured tone he'd been using before. I've spent my entire career putting everything I have into my work. Every film, every character, every story got everything I had to give. I've employed thousands of people over the decades, created art that's moved millions of viewers around the world, and told stories that meant something real. And you're sitting here, on your comfortable morning show set, making your comfortable salary, questioning whether I've been responsible enough with my life's work? The host tried to interject. Clint, I think you're misunderstanding. No, Eastwood cut him off sharply. I understand perfectly. This is what you do now. You invite someone on, you smile, you act friendly, and then you ambush them with accusations dressed up as questions. You're not journalists. You're performers playing at being journalists. The co-host, looking genuinely rattled now, attempted to de-escalate. We're not attacking you, Clint. We're just having a conversation about culture and how it changes. Eastwood leaned forward, his eyes locked on the host's. Culture changes, sure. But you know what doesn't change? The need for honesty. The need for stories that challenge people instead of coddling them. You want to talk about my films being outdated? Let me tell you what's outdated. This whole charade you're running here, pretending you're doing something important while you tear down anyone who doesn't parrot your talking points. The lead host's smile was completely gone now. The professional mask had slipped, and underneath it was clear frustration. I think that's unfair, Clint. We're giving you a platform to share your perspective. A platform? Eastwood's voice rose slightly, the anger becoming more evident. You invited me here under false pretenses. You said you wanted to celebrate my career, and instead, you're putting me on trial for having the audacity to make films that don't apologize for showing strength and resilience. The host shot back, no longer trying to hide his irritation. Maybe that's because strength and resilience can look different than they did in 1970. Maybe that's because the world has moved on, And some of us think that's a good thing. There it is, Eastwood said, pointing at the host. That's what this is really about. You don't want to have a conversation. You want to prove that you're enlightened. And I'm some relic that needs to be educated or put out to pasture. Well, I've got news for you. I don't need your approval, and I sure as hell don't need your lectures. The co-host tried once more to salvage the situation. Clint, please, let's take a breath here. Nobody's trying to put you on trial. Eastwood turned to her, his expression softening slightly but his voice still firm. With all due respect, that's exactly what you're doing. You bring up critics. You use words like problematic. You question whether my work fits in today's world. What am I supposed to think? That you're doing me a favor? The lead host, perhaps feeling like he'd already lost control and had nothing to lose, decided to push even harder. Look, Clint, the truth is that a lot of your films do promote a very specific worldview. A worldview where men solve problems with violence, where emotions are weakness, where compromise is surrender. And yes, a lot of people today find that problematic. Is it really so terrible that we're asking you to reflect on that? The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members operating cameras seemed to freeze. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Eastwood stood up slowly, deliberately, each movement measured and controlled. Reaching for the microphone clipped to his collar, his movements had the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime in front of cameras, who knew exactly how every gesture would read to an audience. But there was no mistaking the fury in his eyes, burning like cold fire behind his famous squint. You know what I find problematic? Eastwood said, his voice dangerously quiet now, the kind of quiet that's somehow more frightening than shouting. Sanctimonious people who've never created anything meaningful in their entire lives, sitting in judgment of those who have. People who've never taken a real risk, never put themselves out there, never faced actual consequences for their choices. Telling those of us who have that, we did it wrong. You want to talk about violence in my films? Fine, let's talk about it. How about we talk about the violence you do every single day to honest discourse, to nuance, to complexity, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there's more than one right way to see the world. The host stood up too, clearly feeling defensive and attacked, his professional composure completely shattered now. That's not fair, Clint. That's really not fair. We're trying to have an honest conversation here about culture and art and responsibility. Honest? Eastwood almost laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever, just bitter acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. There's nothing honest about what you're doing here, not one damn thing. You set a trap from the beginning, planned this whole ambush, and then you act all surprised and offended when someone calls you out on it. You want to know what's truly outdated? This performative nonsense where you pretend to care about important issues, while really you're just trying to score points with your audience by taking down someone they've been told by people like you that they're supposed to disagree with. The lead host's face was red now, flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, his own composure fully visible, cracking like a dam about to burst. You could see veins standing out on his neck, could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. You're way out of line, Clint. You're way, way out of line here. We invited you here as a guest, welcomed you into our studio, into our home, and you're treating us with complete and utter disrespect in front of our audience and everyone watching at home. Disrespect? Eastwood's voice rose to match the host's, no longer controlled, no longer measured, just raw emotion pouring out after being pushed too far. You started this whole thing. You're the one who invited me here under the guise of celebrating my work, honoring my career, and then you spent the entire interview implying that everything I've done is wrong, that I need to apologize for my entire body of work, that I should somehow be ashamed of the films I've made and the stories I've told. Films that people actually connected with, by the way. Films that meant something to millions of viewers. And you have the balls to talk to me about respect? The co-host stood up too, her heels clicking on the studio floor as she tried to physically place herself between the two men, holding out her hands in a pleading gesture. Okay, let's everyone just calm down for a second here. Let's all take a breath. We're on live television. Millions of people are watching this right now. We need to maintain some level of professionalism. We need to... I don't care who's watching, Eastwood interrupted, his voice cutting through her attempt at peace. making like a hot knife through butter. I don't care if it's 10 people or 10 million people. I'm done playing this game, done being polite while you insult everything I've worked for. I came here in good faith, accepted your invitation, cleared my schedule, and you ambushed me with this nonsense. You can dress it up however you want. Call it journalism. Call it cultural conversation. Call it whatever the hell makes you feel better about yourselves at night. But I know what it really is. And so does everyone watching. It's a hit piece, live on air, designed to make me look bad and make you look enlightened. And I'm not going to sit here and be part of it for one more second. The lead host, seemingly abandoning any attempt at maintaining a professional demeanor, stepped closer. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. This is what journalism looks like, Clint. We ask hard questions. We don't just let famous people come on and say whatever they want, without pushback. Tough questions? Eastwood shook his head, pulling the microphone completely off now. Those weren't tough questions. Those were accusations with question marks at the end. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then you're in the wrong business. Maybe you're the one in the wrong business, the host shot back. And immediately you could see in his face that he regretted saying it. But it was too late. The words were out there, broadcast live to millions of viewers. Eastwood stared at the host for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold. You know what? You might be right. Maybe I am in the wrong business. Because clearly this business has been taken over by people like you. People who care more about tearing others down than building anything up. People who think asking gotcha questions makes them brave, when really it just makes them bullies with a camera. The host opened his mouth to respond. But Eastwood wasn't finished. I've worked with some of the greatest directors, actors, and crew members in the history of cinema. I've stood on sets at 4 a.m. in the freezing cold because I believed in the story we were telling. I've poured my heart and soul into every frame of every film. And you, sitting in your comfortable chair, with your makeup perfect and your talking points prepared by someone else, you have the nerve to question whether I've done it right. You have the nerve to imply that my life's work is somehow less valuable because it doesn't conform to your narrow view of what's acceptable? The co-host reached out, trying to touch Eastwood's arm in what seemed like a calming gesture, but he pulled away. Don't, he said firmly. I'm not some child who needs to be managed. I'm a grown man who's earned the right to stand by his work without apologizing to people who wouldn't know authentic storytelling if it hit them in the face. The lead host, his pride clearly wounded, crossed his arms defensively. This is unbelievable. You come on our show, you insult us, you insult our audience, and somehow we're the bad guys? You invited me here to insult me first, Eastwood countered. You just did it with polite words and fake smiles. At least I have the decency to be honest about what I think. Fine, the host said, his voice tight with anger. If that's how you feel, maybe you should leave. The studio audience gasped. You could hear it clearly, this collective intake of breath from hundreds of people who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Eastwood looked at the host for a long moment, and then a slight smile crossed his face. Not a warm smile, but the kind of smile that said he'd just won something. You know what? I think I will, Eastwood said calmly. He dropped the microphone on the chair behind him, the thud echoing through the studio. I don't need this. I don't need your approval. I don't need your platform. And I sure as hell don't need to sit here and be lectured by people who mistake self-righteousness for wisdom. He turned toward the edge of the stage, but then stopped and looked back at the cameras, speaking directly to the audience at home. To anyone watching this, who actually appreciates honest storytelling, who values films that challenge you instead of comfort you, who understands that art isn't supposed to be safe or easy or approved by committee, thank you. Thank you for supporting my work over the years. As for this circus, he gestured at the hosts in the studio around him. I'm done being part of it. The lead host, perhaps realizing that this was going to be absolutely terrible for the show's image and their personal reputation, tried one last desperate time to regain control of the situation. His voice took on a pleading quality, completely different from the aggressive questioning of just minutes before. Clint, come on. Please don't do this. Let's not end it like this. We can work this out. Just sit back down, take a breath, and we can talk this through like adults. I'm sure we can find some common ground here. But Eastwood was already walking, already done with the whole situation. He moved across the stage with that distinctive gait that had carried him through dozens of films over 6 decades, through countless scenes and situations. That steady, purposeful stride that said nothing was going to stop him or slow him down or change his mind. It was the same walk he'd used in his westerns, the same determination, the same refusal to back down. "Clint," the host called after him, his voice cracking slightly with desperation and embarrassment, but there was no response. Eastwood didn't even turn his head, didn't acknowledge that he'd heard anything at all. The co-host looked frantically at the producers off camera, her eyes wide and panicked, clearly unsure what protocol was for when a major Hollywood legend walks off your show in the middle of a live broadcast. The lead host just stood there frozen, watching Eastwood leave, his expression a mixture of anger, shock, and the dawning realization that this was going to follow him for the rest of his career. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent or boo, or what the appropriate response was to what they were witnessing. Some people started clapping, showing their support for Eastwood. Others sat in stunned silence with their mouths literally hanging open, and a few were visibly upset, perhaps feeling like they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have seen. The cameras didn't know where to focus either, cutting frantically between the retreating figure of Eastwood, his back straight and his steps unwavering, the flustered hosts looking at each other helplessly, and the confused audience members trying to process what had just happened in front of them. As Eastwood reached the edge of the stage, one of the young production assistants, looking terrified and unsure, tried to help him down the steps, reaching out a hand in an automatic gesture of assistance. But he waved them off with a sharp, dismissive motion. He didn't need help. He'd never needed help. He took the steps himself, one at a time, steady and sure despite his age, moving with the kind of dignity that only comes from a lifetime of refusing to compromise your principles. And he kept walking toward the exit, never looking back, never hesitating, never giving any indication that he regretted his decision or might change his mind. The host finally turned back to the camera, his face pale now, all the red anger drained away and replaced with something close to panic, trying desperately to salvage something, anything, from this complete disaster of an interview. "Well, that was certainly unexpected. That was, not how we saw this going. We're going to take a quick break here and, we'll be right back. But nobody was paying attention to him anymore. Not the studio audience, not the crew members, not the viewers at home. All eyes were on Clint Eastwood as he pushed through the heavy studio doors with both hands, the kind of doors designed to keep sound in and the outside world out, and disappeared from view into whatever lay beyond. He was leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be a simple morning talk show interview, a friendly chat with a Hollywood legend, and instead became one of the most explosive confrontations in live television history, a moment that would be replayed and discussed and analyzed for days and weeks to come. The doors swung shut behind him with a final, definitive bang that seemed to punctuate everything that had just happened, that echoed through the suddenly silent studio like a gunshot. And just like that, he was gone, leaving the hosts standing on their stage looking lost and embarrassed, leaving the audience members uncertain and uncomfortable, and leaving millions of viewers at home to process what they'd just witnessed, to decide for themselves who was right and who was wrong, to argue about it on social media and at dinner tables and in offices across the country. The silence in the studio was deafening, broken only by the quiet mechanical sounds of cameras still running, and the nervous coughs of audience members who didn't know what else to do.